Hello, I've got chapter 9 of Barnaby Brocket today. So chapter 9 is called Something to Read at Last. So if you remember last time, he met, what was her name? He met a girl, well, he met Thiago and Thiago's daughter, who was called, I want to say it began with P. I can't see it. Maybe you remember. I can't see it. Never mind. Anyway, well, let's carry on with today's. So, something to read at last. A few days later, Barnaby was sitting on his own in one of the barns, holding a sack of coffee beans on his lap to stop himself from floating away. There you go, Palmyra. When Palmyra came in with a glass of ice-cold orange juice and a sandwich. "I'm sorry," she said, pausing in the doorway. "I didn't know you were in here." "It's all right," said Barnaby, who had been feeling a little lonely anyway and was glad of some company. "You can join me if you like." Palmyra smiled and sat beside him on one of the overturned barrels. "I usually take my breaks out here," she said. "It's quiet. I can be alone with my thoughts." Barnaby nodded. He wondered whether she wanted to be on her own now, but he didn't want to pass up the opportunity to spend some time with her. The night before, he had had a dream about Palmyra in which they'd decided to go back to Sydney together. A part of him wanted to tell her about it, but he was too embarrassed. "You like it here at the farm?" she asked him. "Very much," said Barnaby. "Ethel and Marjorie have been very kind to me." "They are good people," she agreed. "My father and I are very grateful to them." "I like Thiago," said Barnaby. "He taught me how to ride a donkey." Barnaby thought he could see tears forming in Palmyra's eyes. When he said this, she placed a hand on her stomach for a moment and held it there, and he wondered whether she was feeling sick. "He has taught me many things too," she said, "but now he will not even speak to me." "Were you born here?" asked Barnaby, and Palmyra shook her head. "Not here," she said, "not even in Brazil. My family were very poor. I was born in Argentina, in a city that knew nothing but poverty. My mother died when I was a baby, and soon after this my father and I moved across the border and found this coffee farm. Miss Ethel and Miss Marjorie took us in, and we've been here ever since." "Did you know Vincent?" asked Barnaby, who had discovered in his bedroom a set of sketchbooks filled with the most extraordinary drawings, each one signed with that name. Most of them were of people, but they weren't quite like any people that Barnaby had seen before. The figures stood in the centre of the pages, but they were surrounded by things that seemed to be part of the subject's life, not things they owned, but things they felt. One drawing that he particularly liked featured a young boy of about Barnaby's age, and all around him were colours and thunderbolts, empty plates and intricate maps of South America. When he turned it over, he found the words "self-portrait" written in a neat hand on the other side. "Yes, of course," replied Palmyra. "He lived here all through his youth." "Can you tell me anything about him? I've been looking at all the work he left behind. I've never seen anything like it. And that enormous painting in the hallway next to the kitchen, that's one of his, isn't it?" "Yes, it's beautiful, isn't it? I could stare at it for hours. Miss Ethel and Miss Marjorie met him when he was only 8 or 9 years old. They found him creating, what is the word? Drawings and paintings on the side of a building." "Art," suggested Barnaby. "Graffiti," said Palmyra. "At that time he was drawing insulting pictures of our president, who was a son of a dog and stole the wealth of the people in order to build golden bathtubs in his palace and bathe in the sweat of the working men." "Gross," said Barnaby, pulling a face. "It's a metaphor," said Palmyra with a shrug. "The whole country despised this man, but we lived in fear of him too. He had the army under his control and could not be removed. He taxed us beyond our means and didn't care whether we had enough money to feed ourselves. The newspapers were afraid to criticise him in case they were closed down and their editors thrown on the streets. The writers had no courage either. Only this little boy, still a child, discovered a way to express the people's dissatisfaction with his rules. And with paint that he found who knows where, in the slum heaps, in the dustbins, in the trash piles. He created magnificent pictures on the walls of the city, full of strange colours and curious designs, which showed the world who this man was at his heart. The people became enamoured of him, and the police wanted to hunt him down and capture him. If they had discovered his whereabouts, he would have been sent to jail, maybe even to his death. But one night, Miss Ethel and Miss Marjorie happened upon him when they were in the city and followed him back to his slum, only to find that he lived alone in a little corner on a pile of cardboard boxes. "Where were his parents?" asked Barnaby. "Vanished," replied Palmyra. So they took Vincent back to the coffee farm and brought him up as if he was their own son. They educated him, gave him clean canvases and expensive paints and brushes, encouraged his talent to grow more and more every day. Finally, he became a great painter and left for New York, where he soon became one of the most famous and celebrated artists in the land, and he owes it all to those two ladies. "There seem to be a lot of people here without families," said Barnaby. "Ethel and Marjorie told me that they were sent away from their families too because they were different, but they seem perfectly normal to me." Palmyra smiled. "That's because they are," she said. "We all are. Their idea of normal just happens to be different to some other people's idea of normal. But this is the world we live in. Some people simply can't accept something that is outside of their experience." "My mother had never known anyone who floated before," said Barnaby. "I think that's why she cut a hole in my rucksack." He thought about it and bowed his head a little. "Maybe she just didn't love me," he said. "Not the way I am." "A mother will always love her child," said Palmyra, putting an arm around him and pulling him close. "No matter what he does or who he is. I know this for certain. I know it already." Barnaby cuddled up closer to Palmyra and said nothing more, feeling very sad that he was here in Brazil with people he barely knew and not in Sydney throwing a ball around the living room for Captain W.E. Johns. He would have happily stayed in Palmyra's embrace for the entire afternoon, only a sound behind them made them both turn around to see Thiago standing on the other side of the barn, listening to their conversation. Perhaps it was the way the sunlight was streaming in through the opposite doors, but Barnaby was sure that his cheeks were wet, as if he had been crying. But he couldn't look for long, because the moment they turned around and Thiago realised that he had been discovered, he disappeared out into the coffee farm. On Friday night, the ladies held a barbecue for Barnaby to wish him well on his journey back to Australia. They gave him 2 tickets in a colourful envelope, one for the train to Rio de Janeiro and the other for the plane back to Sydney. And later, when he went to thank them for their many kindnesses, he found them talking to one of the women who worked on the farm. "And Palmyra hasn't heard from him since he left," Marjorie was saying, and Barnaby frowned, wondering who they were talking about. "Not a word. There's more chance of the Stone Age returning than there is of that boy coming back to Sao Paulo," said the woman, whose name was Marie Consuela. "There's more chance of dinosaurs ruling the earth once again. We all knew he was bad news from the start. I said it and you both heard me. I took one look at that pretty face and said he was the devil incarnate. And I promise you that if Thiago ever catches up with him, there will be trouble like there has never been before." "Well, if that brutish boy is gone, then good riddance to him," said Ethel. "I only wish Thiago would take care of Palmyra again. He's lost without her, anyone can see that, and she needs her father now more than ever before. It seems to me that if... Oh, Barnaby, did no one ever tell you that you shouldn't eavesdrop on other people's conversations?" "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I only wanted to thank you for letting me stay this week." "You're very welcome," said Ethel. "But are you really sure you want to go? Your parents did such a terrible thing after all. I don't know why you want to go back there." "They might be regretting it now," said Barnaby. "If I can just get back to Australia, then I'll know for sure. Thiago bought me a postcard in the village and I'm going to send it to them tomorrow and to tell them I'm on my way." "I think we should have a toast," said Marjorie, calling all the workers together and raising her glass to Barnaby. "What fun it's been to have you here," she said. "And I think Palmyra has a little present for you, don't you, dear?" The girl stepped forward, a shy smile on her face that made Barnaby's heart skip a beat. "Since you're leaving us, I thought you might like something to remember us by," she said, handing him a beautifully wrapped package. "Something to remember me by." Barnaby smiled in excitement as he took off the paper and was delighted to find a small English language edition of The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes inside. He hadn't read anything in a week and was worried about his imagination was going to close down for good. "Thank you," he said, rushing forward and giving her a hug. "Where did you find it? I thought there were no English books here." "I have my ways," she said, winking at him. Seeing how much pleasure she'd given the boy with a single book made everyone at the barbecue burst into a round of applause, and Palmyra smiled at them, gazing around in happiness at this unusual family before locking eyes with the one she loved most of all, her father, Thiago. His face was grim, but then he started to smile, remembering how she had consoled Barnaby when he was upset about his family, and seeing how she had delighted him by offering this thoughtful gift. And his heart broke for the daughter he loved as he ran forward and wrapped his arms around her, holding her close and whispering words in her ear that made her understand she had a father who would never be separated from her or her baby ever again. The following day, as Barnaby boarded the Fonseca Express, he could barely keep his eyes open. He had partied long into the night and barely slept at all. Now he found a seat in an empty compartment, put on his seatbelt to prevent himself from floating to the ceiling, and kicked his shoes off, yawning loudly and hoping no one would come to disturb him. He read A Scandal in Bohemia, the first of the Sherlock Holmes stories, and barely noticed the time passing. When he finished, he put the book away and wrote the postcard home. When the conductor came to check his ticket, he promised to put it in the station postbox at the next stop. And then, without thinking, to set an alarm to wake him when the train arrived in Rio de Janeiro, Barnaby closed his eyes and fell asleep. There might be a problem there. He hasn't set an alarm. And here, there is a postcard there. And so this is the postcard that he's written to his family. So it says, "Dear family, you're probably wondering where I am since I haven't been home in more than a week. After I floated away, I got saved by two ladies in a hot air balloon. But because of the direction of the wind, I wasn't able to come straight home. You can't turn a balloon around, you see. You have to go the way the wind blows. And it blew me all the way to Brazil. I miss Sydney and all of you. I'm on my way home and we'll see you soon. I'll try not to float anymore, but I'm not sure how. But I promise to do my best. A special hello to Captain W.E. Johns, your son, brother, master, Barnaby. P.S. When I come home, I'd like to invite my friend Palmyra to visit us. She's never been to Australia, but she says she'd like to." There we go. So we'll see what happens next time.